This year marks the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Tom Sinas joins us to review some of the basis of this landmark law. Tom, thanks for joining us. What is the overall purpose of the ADA, and tell us, who does it apply to?
Well, you're right. It's been 30 years since George H.W. Bush passed or signed the Americans with Disabilities Act, which of course was passed by Congress. And what was the purpose, you ask? Well, the purpose of the ADA was to provide a federal law. That means a law that applies, of course, across the United States and across the states, a federal law that prohibited discrimination against individuals with disabilities and prohibited it in the form of hiring, firing, job training, compensation, etc. And it was designed to make a set of uniform standards throughout the United States. And the unique thing about the ADA is that the focus of the law was on private employers. Under the ADA federal law, the statute applies to employers with 15 or more employees. Now, over time in Michigan, as is true in other states, there have been parallel state laws that have been passed since the original ADA. So here, for example, we have a state law that extends these disability discrimination protections to private employers with less than 15 employees. So the standard, you asked, what is the standard? Well, the standard is one of reasonable accommodations. The ADA intends to set forth a framework that says that reasonable accommodations must be made for a person with a disability to ensure that they're able to perform the essential functions of their position. So we see these kind of things all the time, whether it's accessible parking, or an accommodated work environment, or even service animals, job restructuring, job schedules, etc. Those are all examples of employers attempting to create these reasonable accommodations for people with disabilities.
Certainly. If you have a loved one and you don't see those reasonable accommodations, it's very frustrating. So what happens if it's not met?
Well, there's a variety of things that can happen. One of the things is that there's a federal agency called the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EEOC. They have jurisdiction to investigate complaints of violations of the ADA. It's also possible for people who feel that they're a victim of an ADA violation to file a private cause of action. Now, I should say that there are some exceptions to this reasonable accommodations standard, and those exceptions fall under the general category of an undue hardship. So if an employer believes that implementing a certain accommodation would impose an undue hardship, then the employer may not be required to make that particular accommodation.
Sure. A lot to consider here, Tom. How can people get more information about this?
Well, there's a lot of great information all over the web about the ADA. If people want to find our firm in particular, they can find us online at www.sinusdramus.com. Shoot us an email at info@sinusdramus.com, or a phone call the old-fashioned way, 616-301-3333.
As always, we appreciate all of your wisdom. Attorney Tom Sinas, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Janice.